Now, something that's been reported extensively on alt media is something that nobody in the Western mainstream media is reporting. And that is how so many captured prisoners of war of the Ukrainian armed forces are reporting how their officers are abandoning them. Not only that, there are reports on social media of wives, mothers, loved ones of various soldiers reporting how the military leadership is abandoning the men. This is very, very important. You can say maybe a couple of incidents here and there, they're just anecdotes, but there comes a moment when there are enough anecdotes that the anecdotes become data. And we have data. We have enough testimonies of enough POWs, and more importantly, enough loved ones on social media discussing this issue, berating the Ukrainian political leadership, that this is a real thing. And I have a notion as to why this is happening. I have a notion as to why the officer corps is deserting, if not precisely en masse, but they are noticeably deserting. And it's quite obvious. You see, the Kiev authority, the Zelensky regime, Zelensky himself and all his thugs around him, his neo-Nazi thugs, because that's what they are, they have given orders to all of the Ukrainian armed forces to never give up an inch. Do or die, fight to the death, no retreat. Now, of course, in any kind of modern military confrontation, any kind of fight as complex as the one that we are seeing, you need the ability to retreat. There is such a thing as a tactical retreat, and it's perfectly justified. It's perfectly normal. And in fact, lots of winning armies pull back radically out of one area of combat to pivot and go to another. It's perfectly normal. But the Zelensky regime ordering its soldiers to stand and fight to the death. And in point of fact, and the rumors are these, and there are so many rumors that it's probably true, many of these men have been threatened with execution. And in fact, a lot of the more politically motivated officers and soldiers are essentially pointing bayonets at the backs of their comrades in arms to keep them fighting. That seems to be what's going on. Now, officers are always the first to know if things are going tits up. By definition, they have access to better information. And so when a lot of officers start deserting, and it's becoming increasingly easy to desert because so many Ukrainian armed forces are using civilian automobiles to get around, because so many of the armed forces' own vehicles, its jeeps and armored personnel carriers and whatnot, have been destroyed. And so they're resorting to civilian vehicles. And so it's easy for an officer so minded to desert, to get into a civilian car, just as so many others of the military are doing, get in a civilian car, drive off somewhere, change clothes, get into civilian clothes, meet up with his family, and flee. If this is happening on the scale that, from the video evidence, seems to be widespread, then the armed forces of Ukraine are not far from complete collapse. Officers do not flee winning armies. It's pretty obvious now, isn't it? If your army is winning, even if it's at horrible costs, but if it's winning and you know it, and especially if you're an officer with enough information to know what's really going on, you're not going to desert. Even if the losses are horrifying, you're going to keep on fighting because you're on the winning side. You only desert when you know that not only that you're not winning, but you can't win. And that's a key issue. Because, you see, desertion is a capital offense. In every army in the world, if you desert your post, especially if you're an officer, if you desert your post and desert your men, if you're captured, you're going to be court-martialed and probably executed or thrown in prison for a gazillion years. This is extraordinarily serious. This is not something that some officer decides, for no good reason, I'm kind of tired of this war, you know? Come on, it's beer o'clock. I got to keep on fighting. Screw you, man. I'm getting in a civilian car, changing my clothes, driving off, meeting up with my woman, and we're going to go to Warsaw or something. Soldiers don't do that. Officers don't do that. They only do that when they know what's happening, what's really happening. If these stories of officer desertions are true, and I have no reason to doubt it, but if they are as widespread as they appear to be at this time, then it might not be a matter of 2 or 3 months before the war ends. It could be much sooner. It could be that if this kind of desertion is widespread enough that the Ukrainian armed forces all of a sudden collapse, just collapse, and it will be with such remarkable speed. Now, I'm not saying this to denigrate the armed forces of Ukraine. I'm just stating a fact and stating the reality of the situation. If this desertion is as widespread, then the Ukrainian armed forces are not more than just a few weeks away from the end.